There are stories we tell ourselves about the past. Simple stories. Stories that fit into the history books we read as children. Stories where everything moves forward in a straight line, from simple cave people to modern civilization. But what if those stories are wrong? What if the past holds secrets so big, so shocking, that they change everything we think we know about human history? All across the world, separated by oceans and thousands of years, different cultures have told the same story. Stories about beings who once walked this earth. Beings far bigger than any human alive today. Beings of enormous power and terrifying strength. The ancient Hebrews called them the Nephilim. The Greeks knew them as Titans. The Vikings spoke of the Jotnar. Native American tribes told stories of giant cannibals who hunted their ancestors. In the Pacific Islands, in Africa, in Scandinavia, and in South America, the same story appears again and again. Giants once lived among us. But these are just myths, right? Legends made up by ancient people who didn't understand the world. Campfire stories to scare children. Made-up tales to explain things they couldn't explain. That's what we've been told. That's what makes sense in our modern world. But something doesn't add up. Why would people on different continents, who never met each other, all create the same exact myth? Why do these legends sound like real history, with names, places, and detailed descriptions? Why do ancient writings describe these beings not as imaginary monsters, but as real creatures who lived with humans, who had children with humans, who built massive structures that still stand today? And why do strange discoveries keep happening, even today? Old newspapers from the 1800s and early 1900s are filled with reports of giant human skeletons found in burial mounds across America. Photos exist, though controversial, that seem to show bones way bigger than normal human size. Footprints frozen in stone that measure more than twice the size of a normal human foot. Some of these findings have been explained away. Others called it fake. Many have simply vanished, lost in museum basements, with those same museums now claiming the evidence never existed. Is it possible something has been hidden from us? Not through some evil plot, maybe, but simply because humans tend to reject anything that doesn't fit what they already believe? Through scientists who dismiss evidence that threatens their theories? Through the slow disappearance of uncomfortable truths? The story of the giants isn't just about big humans. It's about a chapter of history that may have been forgotten on purpose. A chapter that forces us to question basic beliefs about where humans came from, what humans can do, and what really happened in our ancient past. What you're about to discover may disturb you. It may challenge beliefs you've held your whole life. It may open doors in your mind that can't be closed again. But the evidence exists. The legends continue. The questions remain unanswered. And the truth, whatever it is, waits in the shadows of our memory, patient and terrible and real. Some say these things shouldn't exist, that the very presence of certain artifacts, certain structures, certain legends represents something impossible in the official history of our species. Maybe they're right. Maybe the past was far stranger than we've been told. Maybe the giants were real. This is their story. And it may be more than just a story. The mystery starts not in one place, but everywhere at once. In the shared memory of humanity itself. In the deep past, before written history. In the time we call myth, but which may be something else entirely. Something forgotten. Something forbidden. Something that once walked the earth on legs like pillars, casting shadows across continents and across time itself. Let us begin where all great mysteries begin, with a question that won't go away. Were the giants real? And if they were, what happened to them? To understand the mystery of the giants, we must first understand how big this legend really is. This isn't some local myth from one culture or one time period. This is a global phenomenon, a story thread that runs through almost every civilization that left records for us to study. The pattern is remarkable. The consistency is haunting, and what it means is staggering. Let's begin with maybe the most famous account, the Nephilim of the Bible. The book of Genesis speaks of them in passages that have confused religious scholars for thousands of years. In the 6th chapter, a strange reference appears. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also, afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew root word meaning to fall. They were the fallen ones. But fallen from where? Fallen from what? Later Bible passages give us more details. In the book of Numbers, Israelite scouts returned from Canaan with a terrifying report. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them, grasshoppers. That's the comparison they used. Not slightly bigger humans, but beings so huge that grown men felt like insects next to them. The book of Deuteronomy names one of these giants specifically, Og, king of Bashan. His bed alone was said to be 13 feet long and 6 feet wide, made entirely of iron. Even if people back then exaggerated, the message is clear. This was a being of extraordinary size, but the biblical accounts are just the beginning. The ancient Hebrews also spoke of the Anakim, a race of giants who lived in Canaan before the Israelites arrived. The name comes from Anak, meaning long-necked or giant. These beings were described as fearsome warriors living in fortified cities throughout the land. One of the Anakim, a warrior named Goliath, appears in one of history's most famous stories. According to 1 Samuel, Goliath stood over 9 feet tall, wore armor weighing 125 pounds, and carried a spear whose iron point alone weighed 15 pounds. Whether this specific story is real or myth, it reflects a broader cultural memory, a memory of giants who once ruled the ancient Near East. But the Hebrews weren't alone in remembering giants. Across the Mediterranean Sea, in the birthplace of Western civilization, the Greeks told remarkably similar stories. The Titans, ancient beings of tremendous power and size, filled Greek mythology. According to Hesiod's writings from the 8th century BC, the Titans came before the Olympian gods. They were the first generation of divine beings, children of Gaia Earth and Uranos Sky. These weren't just large humans. The Titans were cosmic forces, beings of such power that it took a 10-year war for Zeus and the younger gods to defeat them. After losing, the Titans were thrown down into Tartarus, a prison deep beneath the earth. But the Greeks recorded other giants beyond the Titans, the Gigantes, earthborn warriors who rose up against the Olympians, the Cyclopes, one-eyed giants who made Zeus's thunderbolts, the Laestrygonians, man-eating giants who destroyed most of Odysseus's ships by throwing boulders from cliff tops. These stories weren't presented as fantasies. Ancient Greek historians like Pausanias wrote down locations where giant bones had supposedly been discovered. The Greeks themselves believed these beings had once walked their lands, had fought wars on their soil, and had left behind physical proof of their existence. In the frozen north, Viking storytellers told tales of the Jötnar giants who lived in Jotunheimr, one of the 9 worlds in Norse mythology. But unlike many mythological traditions, the Norse giants weren't simply evil enemies to be killed. They were fundamental to the cosmos itself. The very substance of the world, according to Norse creation myths, came from the body of Ymir, the first giant. When Odin and his brothers killed Ymir, they created the earth from his flesh, the oceans from his blood, the mountains from his bones, and the sky from his skull. The relationship between the Aesir gods and the Jötnar giants was complex, not just enemies, but family. Many Norse gods had giant ancestors. Thor himself, the great enemy of the giants, was the son of Odin and Jord, a giantess. The walls of Asgard were built by a giant. The goddess Skadi was a giantess. These weren't distant monsters. They were part of the divine family. They were ancient, powerful, and terrifyingly real to those who told these stories around winter fires. The Norse stories recorded specific giants with detailed characteristics. Yeri, Mr., who stole Thor's hammer. Ujazi, who kidnapped Idun. Surt, the fire giant. destined to burn the world during Ragnarok. These beings had names, personalities, family trees. They were described with the specificity of real historical figures, not imaginary creatures. Halfway across the world, in the ancient traditions of India, we find yet another culture speaking of giants, beings they called the Daityas and Danavas. Hindu mythology describes these beings as powerful demons or anti-gods, constantly at war with the Devas gods. But the term demon might mislead Western audiences. The Daityas weren't necessarily evil, they simply opposed the cosmic order maintained by the gods. More importantly for our investigation, they were described as beings of enormous size and strength. Close-up of ancient Sanskrit texts, the characters flowing across weathered palm leaves. The Mahabharata, one of India's great epics, mentions numerous giants. Bakasura, a cannibal giant who terrorized a village until killed by the hero Bhima. Hidimba, another giant whose sister married Bhima and had a son Ghatotkacha, who himself had giant size and supernatural powers. The Ramayana describes Ravana and the Rakshasas, beings of terrible appearance and great size, who ruled the kingdom of Lanka. While sometimes described as demons, the physical descriptions suggest creatures far larger than normal humans, needing vast palaces and enormous weapons. What's particularly interesting is that Hindu texts often describe these giants not as supernatural beings, but as members of ancient races that once ruled the earth before being replaced by smaller humans. The Puranas speak of different ages of mankind, earlier ones inhabited by beings of far greater size and longer lives than those who came later. Perhaps most striking of all is how common giant legends are among the native peoples of North America cultures that developed in complete isolation from the old world, yet whose stories echo those same ancient themes. The Paiute people of Nevada preserved detailed oral histories of the Site-Ka red-haired man-eating giants who once lived in the region. According to these traditions, the Site-Ka were tall, hostile, and smart, using woven duck decoys for hunting that suggest intelligence beyond mere savagery. The Paiute legends claim their ancestors eventually trapped the remaining Site-Ka in Lovelock Cave and set a fire at the entrance, smoking them out and killing them. When Lovelock Cave was dug up in the early 20th century, archaeologists discovered unusual artifacts and some claim bones of extraordinary size. Though these reports remain controversial, the Navajos speak of the Starnake, a race of white-skinned giants who lived in what is now Arizona. The Comanche legends tell of a race of tall, light-skinned people who lived in the lands they later inhabited. The Aztecs believed their ancestors displaced a race of giants called the Quinametsin, who had built the pyramids and great cities of Central America. Across the Great Lakes region, many tribes preserved stories of giants. The Allegheny were described as a powerful race of giants who controlled the Ohio River Valley before being driven out or destroyed by the ancestors of the Seneca and other tribes. When European settlers began digging up these mounds in the 1700s and 1800s, reports flooded newspapers claiming the discovery of giant skeletons 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet tall, sometimes larger. We'll examine these claims more closely later. For now, what matters is this. The native peoples themselves consistently said that these mounds contained the bones of giants who existed before their own ancestors. Even in the most isolated parts of the Pacific Ocean, the story continues. The legends of Easter Island speak of giants who carved and moved the massive stone-head statues. Polynesian mythology across multiple island groups describes giant beings who once lived on the islands. In Patagonia, at the southern tip of South America, early European explorers reported meetings with native peoples of unusual height, giving rise to legends of Patagonian giants that lasted for centuries. While exaggerated in the retelling, these accounts may preserve a memory of populations with greater average height than European norms. Africa, too, has its giant traditions. The Zulu people speak of a race of giants. The Maasai preserve legends of enormous beings who once ruled East Africa. The Sahara region, in particular, holds rock art showing human figures of vastly different sizes, some enormous, others normal-sized, sharing the same scenes as if recording actual encounters. This is the pattern. This is what needs explanation. From the Arctic to the tropics, from the most ancient civilizations to more recent native cultures, from societies with writing to oral traditions passed down through generations, the story remains basically the same. Giants once walked the earth. They were powerful, often dangerous, and ultimately were defeated or disappeared. They left behind structures, legends, and possibly physical remains. They had children with humans. They taught humans certain skills, and then they were gone. Traditional scholars explain this as independent myth-making, the universal human tendency to imagine beings larger and more powerful than ourselves. The giant is a common symbol, emerging from psychological needs to explain fears, explain natural events, or make ancestors seem greater. This explanation is reasonable. It may even be correct. But it requires us to believe that hundreds of cultures across tens of thousands of years, separated by oceans and mountains and deserts, all independently created, detailed, consistent legends about the same type of beings, including similar descriptions of their physical appearance, their conflict with smaller humans, their eventual defeat, and their lingering presence in the form of bones and ruins. It requires us to believe that ancient peoples, when they claim to have discovered giant bones, were always mistaken about what they found, that when they pointed to huge structures and said, "The giants built this," they were engaging in pure fantasy with no basis in actual memory. It requires us to dismiss thousands of consistent reports as mere coincidence. And maybe that's the correct answer. Maybe giants are nothing more than a powerful myth, a psychological projection, a cultural symbol with no basis in physical reality. But what if there's more to it? What if these legends preserve pieces of genuine historical memory? What if something about the deep past of our species, something we've forgotten or never fully understood, explains why this story appears worldwide? The question isn't whether giants appear in global mythology. They clearly do. The question is why. Why does this particular myth, with such specific details, appear independently across disconnected human populations? Some scholars have suggested the myth spread from a single source as human populations moved around. But this requires a global spread so ancient that it happened before even the earliest civilizations we know of. It pushes the origin of the giant myth back into the mists of prehistory, to a time before writing, before farming, perhaps before even the last ice age. If that's true, then the legend of the giants may be one of the oldest stories in human consciousness. Older than any civilization, older than any religion, a story carried in the collective memory of our species for tens of thousands of years. But memories that last that long rarely come from nothing. They begin with something real, something experienced, something that left such a deep impression that it survived the ages, passed from generation to generation, changing in the telling but keeping its core truth. What was that core? What was the experience that gave birth to the universal legend of giants? The ancient texts give us names, locations, and family trees. They tell us where the giants lived, how they fought, why they fell. But they can't tell us whether any of it actually happened. For that, we must turn to the physical evidence. We must examine what has been found in the earth itself, in the burial mounds, in the caves, in the archaeological sites that have produced strange findings that continue to puzzle researchers today. We must ask, is there any physical proof that giants once walked this earth? The answer may be more disturbing than you expect. On the 11th of September, 1880, the New York Times published an article with a startling headline, "A Giant from the Mound Builders." The report described the discovery of a massive skeleton in a burial mound near Cayuga, Ontario. The skeleton measured 9 feet, 3 inches in length. This wasn't a cheap tabloid. This was the New York Times even then, one of America's most respected newspapers. It wasn't the only report. On the 20th of December 1897, the Toronto Daily Telegraph described finding a skeleton measuring 11 feet, 5 inches in a mound near Serpent Creek, Ohio. The article claimed the skull alone could hold a half bushel of grain. The Nevada Review Miner reported in June 1931 the discovery of two skeletons of gigantic size in a limestone cave near Lovelock, Nevada, matching the Paiute legends of the Ca giants. In 1833, soldiers digging at Lompoc Rancho, California, supposedly unearthed a male skeleton 12 feet tall, surrounded by carved shells, stonework, and strange artifacts. A mission priest was said to have written down the find. The 1800s and early 1900s are filled with such reports. Dozens and dozens of accounts, published in local and national newspapers, claiming the discovery of human remains far bigger than normal human height. 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet. Some claims reached 10 feet or more. The accounts follow a pattern. The skeletons are usually found in burial mounds. They're often accompanied by copper ornaments, unusual weapons, or fancy grave goods. The skulls are frequently described as having strange features: double rows of teeth, sloped foreheads, prominent brow ridges. And then, in almost every case, the remains disappeared, sent to the Smithsonian Institution for study, according to many reports. Never to be seen again, lost in the archives, misidentified, destroyed. The official position of the Smithsonian, stated repeatedly, is that no such remains have ever been in their possession. This is where the mystery deepens, and where we must be careful. There are basically three possible explanations for these newspaper reports. First, they were hoaxes, mistakes, or exaggerated stories about normal-sized remains. Frontier newspapers weren't known for checking facts carefully. Reporters eager for attention may have exaggerated. Showmen may have faked evidence. Second, the remains were real but misidentified. Mastodon bones, mammoth remains, or other prehistoric giant animal bones were mistaken for human skeletons. Photos were manipulated. Medical conditions like gigantism affected some individuals, and their unusual remains were sensationalized. Third, the remains were genuine evidence of a population of unusually large humans that once lived in North America, and these remains were hidden or lost on purpose to protect the official archaeological story. The third explanation has given rise to what's known as the Smithsonian cover-up theory. Believers argue that the institution has actively hidden evidence of giants because such evidence would contradict established theories about who first came to the Americas and what pre-Columbus civilizations were like. This theory has become very popular in alternative history circles. It suggests a deliberate conspiracy to hide knowledge of advanced ancient American civilizations that existed before known native peoples. Civilizations perhaps connected to the legendary Atlantis or other lost societies. The problem is that no solid evidence of such a conspiracy exists. No leaked documents. No whistleblowers from inside the Smithsonian. No photographs of the supposed giant skeletons that can be proven real. The Smithsonian's archives are vast, but researchers who've looked through them have found no evidence of giant human remains being hidden away. Does this lack of evidence prove there were no giants? Or does it simply show that whatever evidence may have existed has been lost to time, poor record-keeping, or possibly deliberate destruction? We can't know for certain. What we can say is this: the huge number of historical newspaper reports needs some explanation. Something was being discovered in those mounds. Something was unusual enough to create repeated national news coverage. Modern archaeology admits that some Native American populations showed above-average height. Bone analysis has confirmed the presence of individuals ranging from 6.5 to 7 feet tall, unusual but within the range of natural human variation. Medical conditions like pituitary gigantism can produce individuals over 7 feet. Andre the Giant, the famous wrestler, stood 7 feet, 4 inches, due to a medical condition. Robert Wadlow, the tallest person in history with reliable measurements, reached 8 feet, 11 inches before his death in 1940. So the existence of very tall individuals is unquestionable. The question is whether these isolated cases of medical gigantism can explain the pattern of reports suggesting entire populations of giants. or whether something else might explain the legends and the archaeological claims. Forensic anthropologists have strict methods for determining height from bones. The length of the thigh bone, shin bone, upper arm bone, and forearm bone can be used to calculate living height with reasonable accuracy. When these methods are applied to supposed giant bones that have been properly examined, most fall within normal or slightly above average ranges. But, and this is important, very few of the newspaper-reported giant discoveries from the 1800s left behind remains that modern scientists can examine. The skeletons that were supposedly sent to institutions haven't been found. Private collections that may have held such specimens have been broken up and sold. Photographs that might prove the findings are either missing or of such poor quality that they prove nothing definite. We're left with historical accounts and no physical specimens. This is deeply frustrating for serious researchers. Without bones to measure, without DNA to test, without any material evidence to examine, we can't definitively prove or disprove the giant theory. We're stuck in a middle ground of historical claims that can't be verified. But bones aren't the only type of evidence that's been claimed. Footprints. In various locations around the world, footprints of extraordinary size have been discovered in stone. Some are dismissed immediately as weather patterns or our human tendency to see meaningful shapes in random marks. Others are harder to explain away. In Cleveland National Forest in California, a footprint measuring about 19 inches in length was discovered in granite. The impression shows clear toe marks and a heel, suggesting a human-like foot of enormous size. Near Bombay Beach on the western shore of the Salton Sea, similar tracks have been found. In South Africa, a footprint in granite near the town of Mampoluzi measures over 4 feet in length. Local legend says it belongs to a giant from the time before the Great Flood, a flood story that appears in many African oral traditions. Geologists who've examined these formations typically conclude they're not genuine footprints, but rather natural geological features that just happen to look like feet. Weather damage, mineral deposits, and the tendency of certain rock formations to develop foot-shaped dents can create convincing false impressions. Yet some remain difficult to explain definitively. The problem, once again, is the lack of proper scientific documentation at the time of discovery. Most of these prints were found by regular people, not geologists. They were photographed but not carefully studied. Context wasn't preserved. And so, they remain curiosities, interesting, but not conclusive. Then there are the artifacts themselves. The tools and weapons that seem designed for beings bigger than normal humans. In various museums around the world, particularly in Europe, stone axes and hammers exist that weigh far more than any normal human could effectively use in combat. Some double-bladed axes weigh over 50 pounds, impossible to swing with any practical use unless the wielder had extraordinary strength or size. Swords from certain ancient periods, particularly from Celtic and Germanic cultures, exceed 6 feet in length. While ceremonial weapons did exist, some of these blades show signs of use in combat nicks, repairs, wear patterns, consistent with actual fighting. The standard explanation is that these items were indeed ceremonial, or that they were designed to be used with 2 hands by particularly strong warriors. Some may have been symbolic representations of weapons rather than functional items. But here's where it gets interesting. When these oversized weapons are found in graves, they're sometimes with bones that suggest the person was larger than average. Not giant by legendary standards, but noticeably tall, 6.5 to 7 feet, enough to make using such weapons, at least theoretically, possible. Medieval armor provides another interesting data point. While most surviving examples fit men of average height for their time, several pieces exist that were clearly made for individuals of exceptional size. The armor of King Henry VIII, for instance, shows he stood around 6 feet, 2 inches tall, remarkably tall for the 1500s, when average male height in England was closer to 5 feet, 7 inches. Other pieces of armor in various museums suggest wearers in the 6.5 to 7 foot range. These aren't giants by legendary standards, but they do confirm that populations, in various times and places, included individuals of unusual height, who would have seemed giant-like to their shorter neighbors. Maybe this is the seed from which the legends grew, the gradual myth-making of real but simply tall people into the giants of legend. Or maybe not, because there's another category of evidence that demands consideration. Evidence that can't be dismissed as misidentification or exaggeration. The structures themselves. The monuments left behind by ancient peoples that seem to require builders of extraordinary strength, or at least extraordinary engineering abilities, that we still don't fully understand. The builders of these structures were human. We know this because we've found their remains, their settlements, their pottery. They weren't giants in the legendary sense. And yet, the scale of what they accomplished seems to exceed what we'd expect from primitive peoples with bronze and stone tools. The weight of the stones, the precision of the placement, the engineering knowledge needed to transport, lift, and position these massive blocks. Some researchers have suggested that the legends of giants may have come not from the builders themselves being physically large, but from the awe and confusion later peoples felt when seeing these monuments. Unable to imagine how regular humans could have moved such enormous stones, they concluded that giants must have been responsible. This is a reasonable theory. It would explain the connection between giant legends and megalithic structures without requiring the existence of actual giants. But it doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the consistent descriptions of giant skeletons being found near these structures. It doesn't explain the specific details in legends that describe the giants as the builders, not just as mythological beings projected onto existing ruins. It doesn't explain the claims controversial, though they are of archaeological discoveries suggesting human populations of unusual size. We're left with fragments, newspaper reports that can't be checked, photos of questionable authenticity, bones that have disappeared, footprints that may be natural formations, weapons that might be ceremonial, structures that inspire wonder but can be explained through standard means. No single piece of evidence is conclusive. But the pile of evidence, the sheer weight of historical claims, legendary accounts, and controversial finds creates a picture that is, at minimum, deeply interesting. Something happened in the ancient past, something that left an impression so strong that cultures across the world preserve stories of giants, something that occasionally surfaced in the form of unusual discoveries that shocked those who found them. Whether that something was genuinely a race of beings of extraordinary size, or whether it was simply the gradual myth-making of tall individuals and impressive ancient engineering, remains an open question. But the question won't go away. The legends persist, the claims continue, and every so often, something is found: a bone, a footprint, a structure that makes us wonder if there might be more to the story than official histories admit. Some say this evidence shouldn't exist, that its very presence contradicts what we know about human evolution and history, that accepting the reality of giants would require us to completely reimagine the past. Maybe that's exactly what we should be willing to do. Not believing every claim without question, but staying open to the possibility that the ancient past holds surprises we haven't yet fully discovered. Because if the giants were real, even if they were simply very tall humans rather than the mythological beings of legend, then much of what we think we know about prehistory may need to be reconsidered. The truth may be buried beneath centuries of earth. It may be hidden in archives we haven't yet searched. It may be encoded in DNA we haven't yet tested. Or it may be staring us in the face, in legends we've dismissed as fantasy, in newspaper accounts we've forgotten, in structures whose construction we still can't fully explain. There are places on this earth where the past refuses to make sense. Places where the evidence of ancient construction defies not just our understanding of what ancient people could do, but our understanding of what should be humanly possible at all. Baalbek is one of those places. The Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek was built by the Romans in the 1st century AD. This much we know. But the temple sits on a foundation, a massive platform of stone blocks that was there before the Romans arrived. Who built this foundation, and how, remains one of archaeology's most puzzling mysteries. The three largest blocks in the foundation, the trilithon, each measure roughly 64 feet long, 14 feet high, and 12 feet deep. They weigh an estimated 800 tons apiece. That's 1.6 million pounds, each one. To put that in perspective, the largest stones used in building the Great Pyramid of Giza weigh about 80 tons. The trilithon stones are 10 times heavier. Modern crane technology can lift about 20,000 tons, but requires huge supporting structures and careful engineering. The ancient builders of Baalbek, whoever they were, somehow transported these 800-ton blocks from a quarry nearly a mile away, lifted them over 30 feet into the air, and placed them with such precision that the joints between them are barely visible. With what tools? With what technology? With what workforce? The standard explanation is that the stones were moved using wooden rollers, ropes, and sheer human labor, thousands and thousands of workers, organized with remarkable discipline, working over many years. The Romans, after all, were master engineers. If anyone could accomplish such a feat, it would be them. But the Romans themselves didn't claim credit for the foundation. Roman historians referred to it as an already existing structure, built by an unknown people. The platform was already ancient when the Romans arrived. In the quarry sits another mystery. Unfinished blocks of even greater size than those at Baalbek. The stone of the pregnant woman, named for local legend, weighs about 1,000 tons. Nearby, another block discovered only in 2014 is estimated at 1,650 tons, making it the largest stone block ever quarried by ancient humans. Why were these stones never moved? Were they simply too large, even for the builders of Baalbek? Or were the projects abandoned for unknown reasons, leaving these monuments to ambition stuck in their birthplace? The precision of the cutting is itself remarkable. The blocks aren't roughly cut, they're precisely shaped, with flat surfaces and sharp right angles. The stone is limestone, relatively soft, but the scale and accuracy of the work suggests advanced planning and sophisticated tools. Some researchers have suggested that the ancient builders had knowledge of leverage, counterweights, and mechanical advantage that we've lost or underestimated. Others point to the possibility of techniques involving water, sand, and patience methods that leave no trace but could theoretically move enormous weights with relatively simple technology. But there's another theory, one that appears again and again in alternative histories and local legends. The giants built it, not symbolic giants, not simply a powerful ancient civilization that seemed giant-like to later peoples, but actual beings of enormous size and strength, for whom moving 800-ton blocks would have been, if not easy, at least possible. This theory is dismissed immediately by mainstream archaeology. There's no physical evidence of such beings. The assumption that moving large stones requires large beings is too simple. It ignores the power of engineering and collective human effort. And yet, the theory persists, not because there's evidence for it, but because the alternative explanations, while theoretically possible, require us to believe that ancient peoples with primitive technology accomplished things that we ourselves would struggle to repeat today, even with modern equipment. Baalbek isn't alone. Across the world, megalithic structures challenge our understanding of ancient abilities. Sacsayhuaman, overlooking Cusco in Peru, is one of the most remarkable examples. The fortress walls are made of stones weighing up to 200 tons, fitted together so precisely that a knife blade cannot fit between them. The stones aren't uniform rectangles, but complex, many-sided shapes, each one cut to fit perfectly with its neighbors. The level of planning and skill required is staggering. Each stone must have been test-fitted multiple times, adjusted, recut, and repositioned until it matched perfectly with neighboring blocks. And we're not talking about small stones, we're talking about blocks weighing as much as 200 tons, transported from quarries miles away, up steep mountain slopes, and fitted into walls with such precision that they've survived centuries of earthquakes that destroyed later Spanish buildings. How was this done? The Inca themselves, according to Spanish writers who arrived shortly after the conquest, claimed they didn't build Sacsayhuaman. They said construction was done by an earlier civilization, one that had knowledge and abilities the Inca themselves had lost. Local legend speaks of giants. The stones, it was said, were moved through the power of sound, through ancient techniques known only to the builders, or through the strength of beings far larger than normal humans. Again, mainstream archaeology offers standard explanations: patient work, clever use of levers and ramps, massive human labor forces, and centuries of built-up engineering knowledge. All of these factors, combined, could theoretically explain the construction. But the question nags: why would ancient peoples choose to work with stones of such enormous size? Moving a 200-ton block up a mountain requires far more effort than moving 20 10-ton blocks. Why not cut the stones smaller and make the work easier? One answer is prestige. The demonstration of power through the ability to move and shape enormous stones. The creation of structures so impressive that later generations would stand in awe. Another answer is durability. Larger stones create more stable structures, particularly in earthquake-prone regions. Sacsayhuaman has survived seismic events that leveled buildings around it. But there's a third possibility, one rarely mentioned in mainstream archaeology. Maybe moving enormous stones wasn't as difficult for the builders as we assume. Maybe they had techniques, or maybe physical abilities that made what seems impossible to us merely challenging to them. Easter Island presents yet another puzzle. Nearly 900 Moai statues dot the island, carved from volcanic rock. The largest standing statue is 33 feet tall and weighs 82 tons. An unfinished statue in the quarry measures over 70 feet long and would have weighed about 270 tons if completed. How were these statues moved from the quarry to their platforms, sometimes several miles away, over rough ground? The Rapa Nui people themselves have legends about how the Moai were moved. They say the statues walked to their destinations, animated by mana, spiritual power. For years, archaeologists dismissed this as a myth, but recent experiments have shown that the statues could indeed have been walked, rocked, side to side, while being pulled forward with ropes, moving in a waddling motion. It's clever, and it works for statues up to a certain size. But the largest Moai? The 270-ton colossus that was never finished? No experiment has successfully shown how such a statue could have been transported. Even with the walking technique, the weight would have been too great. The statue would have broken during transport, and yet Rapa Nui carved it. They started the work. They must have had some plan for moving it, or they wouldn't have invested the enormous labor required to carve it in the first place. What happened? Why were so many statues left unfinished? The standard explanation is societal collapse, environmental damage, and resource depletion led to the end of Moai production and the abandonment of partially completed works. But some researchers have suggested another possibility. The builders were attempting something beyond their abilities. The largest Moai represent an ambition that exceeded their actual capabilities. They were trying to create something that required strength or technology they didn't possess. The pattern repeats across continents and thousands of years. Ancient peoples, separated by vast distances and vast spans of time, independently decided to work with stones of extraordinary size, to transport, lift, and precisely position blocks weighing tens or hundreds of tons, to create structures whose construction methods we still debate today. Stonehenge's sarsen stones weigh up to 50 tons and were transported 25 miles from their quarry. The megalithic temples of Malta feature stones weighing over 50 tons, precisely fitted despite their irregular shapes. The dolmen of Menga in Spain has a capstone weighing 180 tons. In each case, mainstream archaeology provides explanations based on human cleverness, patience, and collective labor. Rollers, levers, ramps, counterweights, and thousands of workers over many years. These explanations aren't impossible. They're supported by experimental archaeology that has successfully moved large stones using ancient techniques. They fit within our understanding of human abilities and ancient technology. But they also require us to believe that cultures across the world independently decided to make their lives enormously difficult by working with stones far larger than necessary. That pride, prestige, or religious devotion motivated them to invest generations of labor in moving rocks that could have been cut into smaller, more manageable pieces. Göbekli Tepe may be the most significant of all these sites because it's the oldest. It's older than farming, it's older than pottery, it's older than any known civilization, and yet it shows sophisticated planning, artistic skill, and the organizational ability to coordinate a major construction project. The pillars weigh up to 20 tons, not as massive as Baalbek or Sacsayhuaman, but still remarkable for a supposedly primitive hunter-gatherer society. The carvings on the pillars show skill and sophistication. The site required planning, leadership, and sustained effort over many years. What were these people? What level of social organization did they have? And how did they acquire the knowledge necessary to work with multi-ton stones? Some researchers have suggested that Göbekli Tepe represents evidence of a lost civilization, a sophisticated culture that existed before the dawn of known history, possessing knowledge that was later forgotten and had to be rediscovered. Others maintain that we simply underestimate the abilities of ancient peoples, that our bias toward technological progress makes us assume that earlier humans were less capable than they actually were. That cleverness, patience, and human cooperation can accomplish remarkable things with relatively simple tools. Both views may be partially correct. Ancient peoples were certainly clever. They developed sophisticated techniques for moving and shaping stone. They organized labor forces that could accomplish impressive things over long periods. But the question remains, why? Why work with stones so large that their movement represents the very limits of human ability? Why create structures so ambitious that even today we're not entirely certain how they were built? Was it simply human ambition, the desire to create something permanent, something that would last forever? Or is there something we're missing? Some aspect of ancient ability, ancient knowledge, or ancient reality that doesn't fit into our current understanding of history? The legends say the giants built these structures. Those beings of enormous strength moved the stones that normal humans could not. That the megalithic monuments are remnants of an earlier age, when different beings walked the earth. We have no physical evidence for such beings. But we have the structures themselves, silent, monumental, precisely engineered, and still standing after thousands of years. What was the secret? What did the ancient builders know that we've forgotten? Were they simply more patient, more clever, more willing to invest their lives in monumental projects? Or were they something more? Something we don't fully understand? The structures remain. The mystery continues. And the giants, whether literal or symbolic, loom over human history, their presence felt in every massive stone that shouldn't have been moved, but was. Some say these things shouldn't exist. That the very presence of these megalithic wonders represents an impossibility that challenges our understanding of the past. Maybe they're right. Maybe we're missing something fundamental about who built these structures, and why, and how. The truth may be far stranger than we ever imagined. If giants once walked the earth, they would have left a trace. Not in legend, not in disputed archaeological finds, but in the most basic record of life itself, DNA. The question is, are we looking in the right places? And more importantly, would we recognize the evidence if we found it? Human evolution is more complicated than most people realize. For decades, the story was presented as a simple, straight line. Primitive ape. Men gradually became more sophisticated, eventually resulting in modern humans. A neat, clean story. But recent discoveries have revealed a far messier reality. The human family tree doesn't progress in a straight line. It branches, it overlaps, it mixes in unexpected ways. Multiple species of humans lived at the same time for thousands of years. They met each other. They competed. They had children together. And some of them were significantly larger than others. Homo heidelbergensis lived about 700,000 to 200,000 years ago. Fossil evidence suggests males averaged over 6 feet tall, with some specimens showing heights approaching 7 feet. They were robust, heavily muscled, with thick bones designed to withstand tremendous physical stress. These weren't giants by legendary standards. but to a population of smaller humans, say, early modern humans, who averaged 5.5 feet tall, a 7-foot Homo heidelbergensis, would have seemed enormous, terrifying even, especially if hostile encounters occurred. Could encounters between different human species, large, robust ones and smaller gracile ones, form the basis for giant legends? Could the cultural memory of such encounters have been preserved in oral traditions, eventually evolving into myths of giants? This is one theory. It has the advantage of being based on known biology. We know Homo heidelbergensis existed. We know they were larger than modern humans. We know they lived at the same time as our direct ancestors in some regions. But there's a problem with this theory. Homo heidelbergensis went extinct roughly 200,000 years ago. Any cultural memory of encounters with them would have to last for 200,000 years to appear in the historical legends we have. That's an extraordinary span of time, far beyond the reach of even the most persistent oral traditions, unless some of these larger human species survived much longer than we currently believe. The Denisovans are one of the most interesting recent discoveries in the study of human evolution. Identified initially from DNA taken from a tiny finger bone found in Denisova Cave in Siberia, they represent a previously unknown branch of the human family. We know relatively little about the Denisovans because we have almost no fossils, just a few fragments. But what we do have suggests they were large. The jaw fragment discovered in Tibet is massive, showing a robust, heavily built individual. Genetic analysis of their DNA suggests adaptations for high altitude and cold climates, along with hints of unusual size and strength. Here's what makes the Denisovans particularly interesting for our investigation. They had children with modern humans. Extensively, populations across Asia, Melanesia, and Aboriginal Australia carry Denisovan DNA, sometimes as much as 5% of their genome. This interbreeding continued until relatively recently in evolutionary terms. The latest evidence suggests Denisovans may have survived until as recently as 40,000 to 30,000 years ago. That places them within the time frame of early human cultures that preserved oral traditions. In other words, it's possible that some legends of giants preserve actual memories of encounters with Denisovans, large, robust humans who look distinctly different from our ancestors, who had different abilities, and who might have seemed giant-like to smaller populations. The DNA doesn't lie. Interbreeding occurred. The descendants of those unions are alive today, carrying fragments of Denisovan genetics in their cells. What were those encounters like? Were they peaceful or hostile? Did ancient humans view Denisovans as kin or as something other? We can't know for certain, but we can guess, based on the legends that persist in regions where Denisovan DNA is most common. Southeast Asian and Pacific Island cultures have strong traditions of giants more prominent than in regions with no Denisovan genetic signature. Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories speak of powerful beings from the ancient past who were larger and different from the ancestors of current peoples. Tibetan legends describe large, powerful, human-like beings that lived in the mountains. Could these legends be cultural memories of Denisovans? It's possible, even probable, in the view of some researchers. The timeline fits. The geographic distribution fits. The general descriptions of large, powerful beings fit the physical evidence we have of Denisovan anatomy. But this theory, while compelling, doesn't fully explain the more extreme giant legends. Denisovans may have been large by the standards of their time, but they weren't 10 feet tall. They weren't the colossal beings described in some ancient texts. They were simply a robust human subspecies, perhaps 6.5 to 7 feet on average, unusually large, but not impossibly so. But what about Gigantopithecus? This extinct ape genus is the largest known primate to have ever existed. Gigantopithecus blacki stood up to 10 feet tall and weighed up to 1,200 pounds. It lived in Asia from about 9 million years ago until as recently as 100,000 years ago. That last date is significant. 100,000 years ago places Gigantopithecus within the time frame of both modern humans and Denisovans. They shared the landscape. They competed for resources. They would have encountered each other. Gigantopithecus wasn't human. It was an ape, likely similar to modern orangutans in behavior, but vastly larger. Could encounters with these genuine giants have formed the basis of some legends? The problem is that Gigantopithecus walked on all fours most of the time, not upright like the giants of legend. Its anatomy was distinctly ape-like, not human-like. Would ancient peoples who encountered Gigantopithecus describe it as a giant human or as a giant ape? Most likely the latter, unless there existed another species, something we haven't discovered yet. Something that combined the large size of Gigantopithecus with the upright, human-like anatomy of hominids. This is where we enter the realm of speculation. No fossils of such a creature have been conclusively identified, but absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, particularly when it comes to the fossil record, which preserves only a tiny fraction of species that have existed. The conditions required for fossilization are specific and rare. Most organisms that die leave no permanent trace. Their bones decay, are scattered by scavengers, are worn away by weather. Only under exceptional circumstances, burial in sediment, protection from oxygen, the right chemical conditions, do bones turn into fossils. It's estimated that the fossil record captures less than 1% of all species that have ever existed. Complex organisms like mammals are particularly underrepresented because their bones are more likely to be destroyed before fossilization can occur. So the fact that we haven't found fossils of a large, upright walking hominid species doesn't definitively prove such a species never existed. It simply means that if they did exist, we haven't yet discovered their remains, or we have discovered them, but haven't recognized them for what they are. Museums around the world have vast collections of fossils and bones, many of which have never been thoroughly examined. Budget problems, staff limitations, and the sheer volume of material mean that countless specimens sit in storage, waiting for scientific attention. It's possible, though, admittedly unlikely, that remains of unusually large hominids are sitting in these collections, misidentified or simply overlooked. A partial skeleton of an unusually large individual might be cataloged as abnormal rather than representative of a distinct population. A jawbone of exceptional size might be attributed to an exceptionally large individual of a known species rather than recognized as belonging to an unknown one. This isn't conspiracy thinking, it's simply the reality of how paleontology works. Identification and classification depend on current understanding. When something doesn't fit established categories, it's often set aside for later examination. And later might be decades away or never. But let's return to what we do know, rather than guessing about what might be hidden. We know that multiple large-bodied human species existed. We know they lived at the same time as modern humans. We know interbreeding occurred. We know that in some populations, genetic variants associated with larger body size persisted. Modern human populations show variation in average height. This variation is partly environmental, nutrition, disease, and other factors affect growth. But it's also genetic. Certain populations carry genetic variants that make them taller. The Netherlands, for instance, has the tallest average male height in the world, over 6 feet. This is partially due to diet and healthcare, but genetic factors play a significant role. The Dutch population carries variants of genes that are associated with increased height. Interestingly, analysis of ancient DNA from European populations suggests that these height-increasing variants have been positively selected, meaning they were beneficial and became more common over time. But the original source of some of these variants may have been mixing with larger-bodied ancestral populations. In other words, modern humans may carry genetic echoes of larger ancestors. Not giants in the legendary sense, but populations with average heights significantly above modern norms. When these genes are expressed in individuals with favorable environmental conditions, they can result in unusually tall people 7 feet or more, without any disease causing it. Could ancient populations have included more individuals with these genetic variants? Could there have been groups where average height was significantly greater than modern norms, say 7 feet, rather than 5.5 or 6? This isn't impossible, If environmental pressures favored greater size, perhaps in colder climates where larger body mass helps retain heat, or in environments where hunting large prey was advantageous, then populations could evolve greater average height over time. Such a population wouldn't be giants by mythological standards. But to smaller neighboring groups, they might seem giant-like, especially if cultural memory exaggerated the difference over centuries of oral retelling. Here's the theory then. From a purely biological perspective, human evolution was more diverse than commonly understood. Multiple species and subspecies lived at the same time, with varying body sizes. Some groups, Denisovans, Homo heidelbergensis, possibly others we haven't discovered, were noticeably large by modern standards. These large populations encountered smaller populations. They sometimes interacted peacefully, sometimes violently. Interbreeding occurred. Genetic variants for larger size entered the modern human gene pool. Over time, as populations mixed and moved around, the memory of encounters with these larger humans was preserved in oral traditions. These memories were passed down through generations, gradually taking on mythological dimensions. The 7-foot humans of reality became the 10-foot giants of legend. Eventually, the larger populations went extinct or were absorbed through mixing. But the memory remained, and occasionally, individuals born with the genetic variants for maximum height would appear seeming to validate the old stories of giants that once walked the earth. This is the most scientifically grounded explanation for the giant legends. It requires no appeals to the supernatural, no lost super civilizations, no genetic engineering by ancient aliens. Just the messy, complex reality of human evolution, viewed through the lens of cultural memory. But does it explain everything? Does it account for the specific details in ancient texts, the descriptions of giants building cities, forging weapons, possessing knowledge beyond that of normal humans? Does it explain the architectural mysteries, the movement of massive stones, the sudden appearance of sophisticated construction techniques in supposedly primitive societies? Does it explain why the legends are so persistent, so detailed, so consistent across cultures that had no contact with each other? Maybe not. Maybe the biological explanation accounts for part of the truth, but not all of it. Maybe there are other factors we haven't considered, other evidence we haven't properly examined, other possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of current scientific agreement. The DNA tells us a story, but it may not be the complete story. And the questions that remain about who built the ancient monuments, what truly gave rise to the global giant legends, and whether something about our past remains hidden from view, continue to echo through the laboratories and field sites where researchers seek answers. Some truths are written in genes, but others may require us to look beyond biology, beyond standard science, into realms of mythology, symbolism, and cultural memory that carry their own form of truth. The mystery isn't yet solved. The giants, whether biological, cultural, or something else entirely, remain at the edge of understanding, waiting to be rediscovered. Or perhaps waiting to remind us that the past was stranger, more complex, and more wondrous than our simplified histories acknowledge. Not all truths are physical. Not all evidence can be measured in laboratories or dug from the ground. Sometimes the deepest truths are preserved in stories, in myths that have survived for thousands of years, in symbols that speak to something fundamental in the human psyche. The question is, what are these myths really telling us? Across every civilization that has left us records, we find the same basic story structure, the same archetypal narrative. In the beginning, there were giants, powerful beings who shaped the world, who built great structures, who possessed knowledge and abilities beyond those of ordinary humans. But these giants were flawed. They were proud, violent, chaotic. They threatened the order of the cosmos. And so the gods or heroes or smaller humans rose up against them. A great war was fought. The giants were defeated, cast down, imprisoned, or destroyed. And the world as we know it began. This is the pattern. This is the story told again and again, with local variations, but maintaining its essential structure, the Greek Titanomachy, the Norse Aesir-Jotun conflict, the biblical war in heaven, the Hindu battles between Devas and Asuras, the Babylonian creation, epic, where Marduk defeats Tiamat, the Chinese myths of Pangu and the cosmic giants, the Japanese stories of the Oni, different names, different settings, different specific details, but the same fundamental narrative. Why? One interpretation, favored by many scholars, is that the giant represents chaos, the untamed forces of nature, the dangerous wilderness that threatened early human societies. In this reading, the defeat of the giants symbolizes humanity's mastery over nature. The transition from hunter-gatherer societies vulnerable to natural forces to agricultural civilizations that could shape their environment. The giant is the storm, the earthquake, the flood personified as a being that can be fought and overcome. This interpretation has psychological power. It explains why the giant is almost always portrayed as the enemy, why the giant must be defeated for civilization to flourish, why the story is told so consistently across cultures because it represents a universal human experience, the struggle to survive in a hostile natural world. But this interpretation, while valid, may be incomplete, because the giants in myth aren't simply forces of chaos. They're often portrayed as builders, as craftsmen, as possessors of ancient wisdom. They created the first tools, forged the first weapons, built the first cities. They taught humans agriculture, metallurgy, writing, astronomy. In many traditions, the giants aren't purely antagonistic. They're ancestral, they're necessary. They're the foundation upon which the current world order was built. The Norse Jötnar, for instance, aren't simply enemies of the gods. They're the primordial beings from which the gods themselves descended. They represent the raw material of existence necessary, powerful, and fundamentally interconnected with the divine order. The Greek Titans similarly serve as the necessary predecessors to the Olympians. They establish the basic structure of the cosmos. They embody fundamental forces, time, light, memory, law. They must exist for the world to function, even if they must also be overthrown for progress to occur. In Hindu mythology, the conflict between devas and asuras is even more nuanced. The asuras aren't evil. They're the other side of cosmic balance. They represent necessary opposition, the tension that drives creation forward. Many asuras are wise, skilled, and worthy of respect. The conflict between them and the devas is eternal, cyclical, neither side achieving permanent victory. This suggests a deeper interpretation. The giants may represent not chaos to be eliminated, but an earlier state of being to be integrated and transcended. In Jungian psychology, the giant could be seen as the shadow, the repressed, primal aspects of human nature that must be confronted and integrated for psychological wholeness. The hero's battle with the giant isn't about destruction, but about transformation, about taking the giant's power and wisdom while overcoming its destructive tendencies. This reading gains support from the prevalence of hybrid figures in mythology. Heroes who have giant ancestry. Gods born from unions between divine and giant parents. Humans who carry the blood of both smaller and larger beings. These hybrid figures are often the greatest heroes. Heracles, descended from Zeus but born to a human mother. Thor, son of Odin and the giantess Jord. Bhima from the Mahabharata, whose son Ghatotkacha had giant stature. David, from the tribe that would later produce kings, who defeated the giant Goliath. The message seems to be, the power of the giants isn't evil. It's necessary, but it must be properly channeled, properly integrated into a balanced worldview. Another interpretation focuses on historical memory encoded in mythological form. Perhaps the giants represent real populations that our ancestors encountered, not beings of supernatural size, but simply humans who were significantly larger, stronger, or more technologically advanced than the storyteller's own ancestors. In this reading, the war with the giants represents actual historical conflicts, encounters between migrating populations and established inhabitants. the displacement of indigenous peoples by newcomers, the absorption of one culture by another through conquest or intermarriage. The giants are remembered as powerful because they were powerful at least initially. They're remembered as builders because they left behind impressive structures that the conquerors couldn't replicate. They're remembered as possessing ancient wisdom because they represented older, established civilizations with accumulated knowledge. But ultimately, they were defeated or absorbed. Their physical remains were buried in mounds. Their descendants intermarried with the newcomers, diluting the distinctive traits that made them seem giant-like. Their knowledge was partially preserved, partially lost, partially transformed in the retelling. This interpretation is appealing because it grounds the myths in possible historical reality, while acknowledging that the details have been transformed through generations of oral tradition. It explains why the myths are so specific, naming particular giants, describing particular battles, identifying particular locations. Real events, however distorted by time, maintain certain concrete details that pure imagination tends to lack. It explains why archaeological discoveries of unusual skeletal remains caused such excitement in the 19th century. People believed, perhaps correctly, that they were finding physical evidence of the beings from their ancestral legends. It explains the connection between giant legends and megalithic structures. If a larger, more advanced population built impressive monuments and was then displaced by a smaller, less technologically sophisticated population, the newcomers would naturally attribute the structures to giants beings, unlike themselves who possessed capabilities they didn't have. But there's yet another interpretation, one that moves beyond both pure symbolism and historical literalism. Perhaps the giants represent a different mode of human existence, an earlier phase of consciousness, a different relationship with the world. In this reading, the size of the giants isn't primarily physical, but psychological and spiritual. They represent humans who experienced reality differently, who were more connected to nature, more attuned to cosmic forces, more capable of feats that seem impossible to us, because our consciousness has been narrowed and channeled in specific directions. Many indigenous traditions speak of a time when humans were more powerful, when the boundary between human and divine was more permeable, when knowledge and abilities now lost were commonplace. The Aboriginal Australian concept of the dream time describes a primordial era when ancestral beings shaped the landscape and established the patterns of existence. These beings weren't simply large humans, they were something other, operating according to different laws. The Hindu concept of the yugas, the ages of mankind, describes a progressive decline from the Satya Yuga, when humans lived for thousands of years and possessed abilities we would consider supernatural, to the current Kali Yuga, when human capabilities are diminished and life is shorter. Similar concepts appear in Greek philosophy, with the ages of man, the golden age of the past, declining through silver and bronze ages to the current Iron Age. In this interpretation, the defeat of the giants represents a shift in consciousness, a narrowing of perception, a trade-off where certain capabilities were lost in exchange for others gained. We became smaller, perhaps, not just in body, but in spirit. We lost the direct connection to cosmic forces that the ancients possessed. We lost abilities that would seem giant-like to our modern selves, but we gained abstract reasoning, technological sophistication, social organization, and written language. The giants, in this reading, are what we were, what we came from, the ancestral state of consciousness that we've evolved beyond or devolved from, depending on your perspective. This interpretation explains why the giants are remembered with ambivalence. They're dangerous, chaotic, destructive, but also powerful, wise, and necessary. They represent something we've lost, something we perhaps needed to lose to become what we are, but something we also mourn. It explains why heroes must often journey to the realm of the giants to gain wisdom or retrieve magical objects. The giant realm represents the deep past, the ancestral memory, the source of primal power that modern humans have largely lost access to, but can still tap into under special circumstances. It explains the prevalence of return of the giants, prophecies in many mythologies. the Norse Ragnarok, where the giants will break free and battle the gods one final time. The biblical return of the Nephilim in the end times. The Hindu prophecy that the ages will cycle and the great beings of the past will return. These may represent not literal predictions, but symbolic statements about the cyclical nature of consciousness, about the possibility or inevitability of returning to earlier modes of being, about transformation and renewal rather than simple progression. Which interpretation is correct? Perhaps all of them, perhaps none of them. Perhaps the truth is more complex than any single reading can capture. The giants in mythology serve multiple functions simultaneously. They're symbols of natural forces. They're cultural memories of historical encounters. They're psychological representations of the shadow self. They're spiritual metaphors for different states of consciousness. The power of myth is that it operates on all these levels at once. A good myth isn't a simple allegory with a single meaning. It's a dense package of meaning that can be unpacked in multiple ways, each unpacking revealing genuine truth. The giants were defeated. This is the central claim of almost every myth. But what does defeated mean? Does it mean they were physically destroyed? That seems unlikely, given the prevalence of stories about giant descendants, about heroes with giant ancestry, about ongoing encounters with remnant giant populations. Does it mean they were driven away? Perhaps. But driven where? The myths often speak of imprisonment rather than exile. The titans cast into Tartarus, the fallen angels bound in chains, the giants sealed beneath mountains or at the edges of the world. Does it mean they were transformed? Absorbed into the population of smaller humans through interbreeding? Diminished in stature over generations? This seems more consistent with both mythological accounts and possible biological mechanisms. Or does it mean something more metaphorical? That the consciousness they represented was superseded by a new mode of being? That the age of giants ended not because they died, but because the world changed in a way that no longer supported their existence? The myths don't give us clear answers. They give us stories layered with meaning, open to interpretation, resistant to simple explanations. And perhaps that's appropriate. Perhaps the mystery of the giants is meant to remain mysterious, not because the truth has been hidden, but because the truth is complex enough that it cannot be reduced to a simple statement of fact. The giants were real, but real can mean many things. They were physically real populations of larger humans whose encounters with smaller populations created lasting cultural memories. They were psychologically real representations of primal forces within the human psyche that must be confronted and integrated. They were spiritually real symbols of a different relationship with existence, a different mode of consciousness that once prevailed but has since been largely lost. They were mythologically real archetypal figures that capture eternal truths about human experience, truths that transcend historical fact while remaining profoundly true. All of these readings can coexist. All of them shed light on different aspects of the mystery. None of them fully explains everything, but together they begin to reveal the shape of something larger than any single interpretation. But there are other interpretations, more controversial ones. Interpretations that push beyond both traditional mythology and standard science into territory that makes most scholars deeply uncomfortable. Interpretations that suggest the giants were something stranger than we've imagined. Something that doesn't fit neatly into our categories of myth or history or psychology. Something that may force us to completely reimagine not just the past, but the nature of reality itself. Some truths are not meant to be spoken aloud. Some knowledge has been deliberately hidden. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. And the deepest mysteries of the giants may lie beyond the boundary of what we've been willing to consider. There are theories about the giants that exist at the margins of acceptable discourse. Ideas that are dismissed by mainstream academia. Concepts labeled as pseudoscience, conspiracy theory, or dangerous misinformation. But what if some of these forbidden theories contain fragments of truth? What if the reason they're dismissed isn't because they're entirely wrong, but because they threaten comfortable assumptions about reality? We must tread carefully here. We must distinguish between evidence-based speculation and baseless fantasy. We must acknowledge that just because an idea has been suppressed doesn't make it true. Sometimes ideas are dismissed for good reason. But sometimes, the truth is stranger than the official story admits. Let's begin with the most controversial interpretation. The idea that the giants were hybrid beings, not fully human, but not entirely either. The products of interbreeding between humans and something else. This interpretation comes directly from certain readings of ancient texts. The book of Genesis speaks of the sons of God coming to the daughters of men and producing the Nephilim giants and heroes. The book of Enoch, removed from the biblical canon but preserved in some traditions, provides even more explicit details about these unions. According to Enoch, 200 angels descended to Mount Hermon and took human wives. These unions produced offspring of enormous size. The Nephilim, who consumed vast amounts of food, began preying on humans and taught forbidden knowledge, including weapons making, cosmetics, astrology, and magic. The traditional religious interpretation is clear. These were fallen angels, spiritual beings who violated divine law by taking physical form and reproducing with humans. The giants were the cursed offspring of this forbidden union, and their presence on Earth was one of the reasons for the Great Flood to cleanse the world of genetic corruption. The secular interpretation is equally clear. This is mythology. Ancient attempts to explain why some people were unusually tall by attributing divine ancestry to them, a way of making sense of inherited traits that produced exceptional individuals. Pure fantasy, with no connection to historical reality. But there's a third interpretation, one that takes the texts more literally than the secular view, but less supernaturally than the religious view. What if sons of God doesn't mean angels, but rather refers to an advanced pre-existing population? What if these accounts preserve distorted memories of encounters between anatomically modern humans and a different, more advanced group? This interpretation suggests that before the rise of known civilizations, there existed a sophisticated culture, one with advanced knowledge of astronomy, engineering, metallurgy, and agriculture. This culture encountered less advanced human populations and shared their knowledge, interbred with them, and produced offspring who seemed exceptional compared to the general population. Over time, this advanced culture disappeared, perhaps through catastrophe, perhaps through simple absorption into the larger human population. But the memory remained, encoded in myths of gods or giants who came from elsewhere, taught humans, interbred with them, and then vanished. This theory has no direct physical evidence, no ruins that can be definitively attributed to such a civilization, no clear genetic markers that distinguish this supposed advanced group from other human populations. But proponents point to certain anomalies: the sudden appearance of sophisticated astronomical knowledge in ancient cultures, the existence of megalithic structures whose construction methods remain mysterious, the surprising genetic diversity in human populations suggesting complex patterns of ancient admixture, the global prevalence of flood myths and legends of a lost golden age. They point to out-of-place artifacts, objects that seem too sophisticated for their supposed time period. While most such artifacts have been explained or debunked, a few remain genuinely puzzling. They point to ancient knowledge that seems beyond what we'd expect from supposedly primitive peoples. The precision of ancient astronomical observations, the mathematical sophistication embedded in certain architectural designs, the metallurgical knowledge required to produce certain alloys. They ask, what if we've underestimated the sophistication of prehistoric cultures? What if civilization is far older than we think? What if there were rises and falls of human societies long before the Sumerians and Egyptian societies whose existence has been erased by time, catastrophe, or deliberate suppression? This leads to an even more controversial subset of theories. The idea that giants were not just large humans, but represented genetic engineering or manipulation in the distant past. This theory suggests that the gods, who created hybrid offspring, weren't supernatural beings or even necessarily more advanced humans, but rather represented some form of intervention in human evolution. That the rapid emergence of anatomically modern humans with our distinctive cognitive abilities represents not gradual evolution, but accelerated development through external influence. The evidence cited for this is sparse and circumstantial. The relatively sudden appearance of modern human traits in the fossil record, the presence of genetic variants in human populations, whose origins are unclear, the missing link problem, the difficulty in fully explaining the transition from earlier hominids to modern humans. But this theory requires extraordinary claims. It requires the existence of an external actor capable of genetic manipulation. It requires technology far beyond what we attribute to any ancient culture. It requires a conspiracy of silence lasting thousands of years. Most scientists reject these ideas entirely. The evidence doesn't support them. The claims are unfalsifiable, structured in ways that make them impossible to definitively disprove, which is a mark of pseudoscience rather than legitimate inquiry. And yet, the questions these theories raise are worth considering, even if the answers they propose are wrong. Why did human evolution accelerate so dramatically in a relatively short time? Why do we possess cognitive abilities far beyond what seems necessary for survival in Paleolithic environments? Why are human babies so helpless at birth compared to other primates, as if our brains develop too quickly for our bodies to keep pace? Why do ancient cultures across the world tell stories of gods descending from the sky? Why do they describe these gods as teachers, as bringers of civilization, as parents of exceptional offspring? There's also the question of what knowledge has been suppressed and why. Throughout history, there are instances of knowledge being deliberately hidden or destroyed. The burning of the Library of Alexandria, the destruction of indigenous records by conquering powers, the classification of certain archaeological findings as sensitive for reasons of national security or cultural protection. Some of this suppression is justified. Protection of sacred sites from looters, prevention of ethnic tensions by carefully managing discoveries that might inflame historical grievances, security concerns about locations that might be vulnerable to terrorism or vandalism. But sometimes the suppression seems harder to justify. Why did reports of giant skeleton discoveries stop appearing in newspapers after the early 20th century? Did such discoveries stop happening, or did they simply stop being reported? Why are certain archaeological sites off limits to independent researchers? Why are some findings kept in storage for decades without being properly studied or published? Why do institutional archives sometimes contain gaps, missing documents, destroyed records, unexplained absences in otherwise comprehensive collections? Again, we must be careful not to see conspiracy where incompetence, bureaucratic inertia, or simple lack of resources might explain the gaps. Archives are incomplete because funding is limited, staff are overworked, and preservation is expensive. Reports stopped appearing in newspapers because journalistic standards improved and sensationalist claims were subjected to greater scrutiny. But the possibility of deliberate suppression can't be entirely dismissed. Throughout history, those in power have hidden truths that threaten their authority. Religions have suppressed texts that contradicted official doctrine. Governments have classified discoveries that might have security implications or challenge national narratives. Academic institutions have sometimes resisted paradigm-shifting findings that would undermine established theories and reputations. Let's consider one final forbidden theory, one that combines elements of the others but adds a dimension that many find even more disturbing. What if the giants are not just a feature of the past, but of the present and future? This theory suggests that human evolution has not stopped, that we are still in flux, that just as the past contained multiple human species with different characteristics, the future may contain similar diversity, or that such diversity already exists, hidden in plain sight or in places we don't think to look. Recent genetic studies have shown that human evolution continues. We're not static. Selection pressures still operate. New variants emerge, spread through populations, and change the characteristics of future generations. Some populations have developed lactose tolerance in just the last few thousand years, a significant evolutionary change in a remarkably short time. High-altitude populations have evolved genetic adaptations to low-oxygen environments. Some populations show evidence of ongoing selection for different height, metabolism, or disease resistance. If evolution can produce such changes in recorded history, what might it have produced in the deeper past? What might it produce in the future? More controversially, what if there are populations even today that show unusual characteristics? Not giants in the legendary sense, but populations with genetic profiles that differ significantly from the norm. Cryptozoology, the study of hidden or unknown animals, has long pursued reports of large bipedal creatures in remote regions. Bigfoot in North America, the Yeti in the Himalayas, the Yowie in Australia, the Almas in Central Asia. Mainstream science dismisses these as misidentifications, hoaxes, or cultural folklore. No bodies have been produced. No definitive physical evidence has been found. The creatures, if they exist, would require breeding populations large enough to avoid inbreeding, which should make them more readily detectable. But what if these reports represent something real? Not mythological giants, not supernatural beings, but populations of large primates, possibly even relic hominid populations, that have survived in small numbers in isolated regions? The evidence is weak. Most purported Bigfoot evidence has been debunked. Photos are blurry or proven fake. Footprint casts can be manufactured. Hair samples come back as known animals when DNA tested, but not all of it has been explained. Some footprint casts show anatomical features difficult to fake: dermal ridges, pressure patterns, evidence of complex foot mechanics. Some eyewitness reports come from credible observers with nothing to gain from fabrication. Some audio recordings contain vocalizations that don't match known animals. Is it possible that something large and bipedal still exists in remote wilderness areas? That stories of giants persist not just as cultural memory, but as ongoing encounters with something that has survived? These forbidden theories ask uncomfortable questions. They challenge our assumption that we fully understand human origins and evolution. They suggest our history may be more complex, stranger, and less completely known than standard accounts admit. They propose that the boundary between myth and history may be more permeable than we're comfortable accepting. Most of these theories are probably wrong. They rely on speculation more than evidence. They fill gaps in our knowledge with dramatic narratives, rather than acknowledging that some questions simply remain unanswered. But being wrong doesn't mean they're entirely worthless. The questions they raise about human diversity, about the completeness of the fossil record, about what knowledge may have been lost or suppressed, about the relationship between mythology and historical memory, these questions have value even if the proposed answers don't. The giants may have been hybrids. They may have been products of genetic manipulation. They may have been advanced populations whose knowledge was lost. They may still exist in some form, hidden in remote places or encoded in our genes. Or they may simply have been tall humans, mythologized over time, whose existence poses no fundamental challenge to our understanding of history. We can't know with certainty. The physical evidence is incomplete. The legends are ambiguous. The scientific data supports multiple interpretations. What we can say is this: the story of the giants refuses to disappear. No matter how often it's dismissed, explained away, or relegated to the realm of pure fantasy, it resurfaces. New findings, in persistent legends, in questions that won't be answered. Some truths are hidden because they're dangerous. Some questions aren't answered because the answers would force us to completely reimagine everything we think we know. And the deepest mystery of the giants may not be whether they existed, but why their story continues to haunt us. Why can't we let it go? Why does something in the human psyche demand that we keep searching, keep questioning, keep wondering if maybe, just maybe, the legends are more than legends? The truth may be far stranger than we ever imagined. We've traveled far in our search for the truth about the giants. We've examined legends from every corner of the globe. We've looked at controversial archaeological claims and the newspaper reports of giant skeletons that appeared and then vanished. We stood before the massive stones of Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman and asked how they could have been moved. We've explored the genetic evidence of human diversity and the possibility that larger human subspecies once walked alongside our ancestors. We've considered symbolic and psychological interpretations of the myths. We've even ventured into forbidden territory, examining theories that challenge our basic assumptions about human history. And now we must ask, what does it all mean? What can we conclude from this mountain of evidence, legend, speculation, and mystery? The truth, as always, is complex. It resists simple answers. It cannot be reduced to a single statement that resolves all ambiguity. But perhaps we can begin to see the shape of it. Perhaps if we step back far enough, the various pieces start to fit together into a picture that makes sense, or at least makes more sense than it did before. Let's start with what we can say with confidence. First, legends of giants appear in virtually every human culture that has left us records. This is not disputed. The pattern is global, persistent, and remarkably consistent in its basic details. Whatever explains this pattern, it must account for the universality and specificity of the legends. Second, human evolution was more diverse than the simple linear progression often presented in popular accounts. Multiple human species coexisted. Some were notably larger and more robust than others. Interbreeding occurred. Modern humans carry genetic traces of these encounters. Third, ancient peoples accomplished remarkable feats of engineering that we still don't fully understand. The movement and placement of multi-ton stones in precise configurations represents either engineering knowledge we've underestimated, techniques we haven't rediscovered, or capabilities we can't easily explain.